let's bring in someone who knows a lot more about this as well, Kraken CEO Jesse Powell. And Jesse, curious about how you're thinking about cryptocurrencies on days like today and what the news overnight means for you.
Not much change for us. We don't have a big footprint in China. It isn't a market that we targeted, and for what it's worth, this is about the 15th time that China has, quote unquote, banned Bitcoin, and they've become exceedingly efficient at it. And I don't think this is going to be the last time that China bans Bitcoin. But I think the story here is what this really means for the Chinese people.
Well, what about for the U.S. as well? Does it create an opportunity for the U.S. to step in when so many folks in the crypto community still have very little clue of what to make of Gary Gensler's plans and, of course, new regulators, for example, who we're seeing at the CFTC and the OCC?
Absolutely. China keeps opening the door for the United States to take the lead in cryptocurrency. And I think this is yet another massive opportunity that's handed to us. And I think, we're still in the early days of crypto. I think that we should look at it like we did the internet. And it's an opportunity for us to develop some massive homegrown global leaders in this space, if permitted to do so by the regulators and by the legislature.
Jesse, this is such an interesting time, too, because we have not seen those U.S. crackdowns yet. You look at some of your competitors, take FTX in Bahamas. What do you think of a move like that?
I think a lot of companies are expanding their footprints around the world. A lot are diversifying away from the United States because of the uncertainty here in the country. It's not really clear where the United States is going to go with it. We see a lot of sort of regulation by way of enforcement or by way of trying to set precedent through enforcement actions rather than clarification at the legislative level. What we really need is absolute clarity and an evolution of these financial regulations that are 80 plus years old in some cases, that predate even the internet, that presume that there is some potentially evil middleman or some lack of transparency in the data. These problems are solved by Bitcoin, and we really need to stop trying to apply 80-year-old regulations to this developing technology.
Jesse, I think the crypto faithful have done a good job as to making their case publicly. They have not necessarily made a great case of making their case to Congress itself and to the regulators in Washington. There's an apparatus down there that can be really hard to crack here. And while we have seen a lot of lobby firms sort of fire up and start to sort of make the case on behalf of some of these companies, I'm wondering how worried you are that some of the regulations and some of the legislation that's being worked on now isn't really being done at all in concert with any sort of legitimate players in the industry.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that happen, actually. I think the infrastructure bill is a great example of this. This is some language that was snuck in at the last minute under the pretense that it was to capture more tax dollars. There was no consultation with the industry on that. It was some people that clearly did not understand the space, giving them benefit of the doubt. I mean, that's kind of the best case scenario. Worst case scenario was a surreptitious attempt at attacking Bitcoin. And this has massive national security issues. This is massive national economic issues. I think we need to have this discussion, and I think we need to worry about protecting this industry and protecting freedom of choice of currency and protecting the consumer. We really need the separation of money and state.
Jesse, dare I ask this question, but I am. A lot of people within the crypto market say that sometimes this can actually be a positive. And as we talk about the price pullback and the volatility, the long-term trajectory of the market has been higher. How do you see impact from today affecting not the short-term price, but long-term? Where do you see it?
Long term, every time China's banned Bitcoin within 90 days has bounced back much stronger than it was before. So this can only be a positive thing if you look back at history. So, I'll just keep on buying more Bitcoin every time it dips.
Well, yeah, speaking of buying the dip, right, we do see a dip that not a lot of people have walked into yet. At what point do people come back?
I think people need to be looking at this as a 5-10 year investment, not day to day. Clearly, the market's very volatile, but if you look back over time, the returns are just outpacing everything else in the market. But you have to be willing to ride the roller coaster.
It's a volatile asset. Of course, that volatility, though, we've seen, Jesse, has actually come down, at least compared to what we saw a couple of years ago, even earlier this year, and of course, back in 2017 and prior. As Bitcoin and as other cryptocurrencies I guess, gain a little bit more legitimacy, for lack of a better phrase. The lack of volatility that typically comes with that, does that worry you at all as an investor?
No, absolutely not. I think the more volatility means that there's a greater investment opportunity here for day traders. As volatility comes down, I think Bitcoin becomes even more useful as an everyday currency, and it becomes more useful to ordinary people, and becomes more reliable as a store of value, especially when you're comparing it against something like the dollar, which is just losing value pretty much guaranteed over the last 18 months. So I think as volatility comes down, that sort of reduces the barriers to entry for people. It reduces some of that kind of psychological fear, and you're going to see more people come into it.
Jesse, you had mentioned the infrastructure bill a little earlier. We all saw that exchange between Brian Armstrong in regards to the SEC. Do you worry at all that the tone between the crypto community and Washington is getting hostile?
Not so much. We have a lot of conversations going on. We've been engaged with Washington for the last 10 years. One issue here is that there's this constant turnover in government, and you might have explained something to somebody 3 or 4 years ago, and suddenly now you have somebody new who's trying to get up to speed and learn things all over again. I can see some of the players in the industry are maybe getting kind of worn out by this process. They're getting a little bit tired of not having clarity. They're trying to understand why these 80-year-old laws are trying to be applied to something like cryptocurrency, especially in the cases where it seems like it's only hurting consumers, offering consumers 5% yield in a market where their banks are maybe, talking about negative interest rates. Why would that be bad for the consumer? Who stands to benefit from a policy prohibiting that? Certainly not the consumer, possibly the incumbent financial services industry, but is that who we should be protecting? Is that who the regulators mandated to be protecting? I don't think that's why these laws were created. So I think it's time to take another look at them and get the legislature back to the table and get these laws changed.
Interesting comments there. On that note, you have said, and a lot of other guests on this program have said, that China's crackdown is a free gift to the U.S., that this could be our time to increase some of the value add when it comes to the market. But is there a risk, though, that other countries follow China's lead? And is that a risk that we are not pricing into the market?
Well, I think that's always the case, right? China has a lot of influence around the world. They seem primarily concerned with their own country at the moment, with the monetary controls that they have in place. I mean, China has a firewall around their internet. We haven't seen much of that in the rest of the world. So I'm not too worried about it. If anything, I'm worried about the United States right now. I'm really excited to see El Salvador have adopted Bitcoin as another national currency alongside the U.S. dollar. I think we're likely to see more of that than we are to see followers of China in trying to restrict the use of Bitcoin for their people.
All right, Jesse, great to get your thoughts here on this really important issue here. We'll hope to catch up with you soon. That's Jesse Powell. He's the CEO of Kraken.